How do you feel about camping out under the stars as you go after the man who greased your father? Well, if you do feel good about it, then you'll need supplies. Beans and bacon, but also coffee. And even though these salty characters from the 1800s are out in America's unforgiving wilderness, modern-day versions of them could order Sparkplug coffee to their favorite trading post. Sparkplug provides, internet back in the 1800s, so they couldn't do it then. Sparkplug provides premium quality coffee. Look at these information nuggets I'm giving you. No internet in the 1800s. It's the best you've ever brewed. It's also the model of affordability and convenience, since it's delivered right to your front door. Canadians can one-up Americans in one key way, too, because they don't have to shell out for shipping. And while Sparkplug being so much cheaper and better than takeout is a huge selling point, joining the Autopilot Coffee Club should be a selling point, too. You can quit or even just pause anytime you might need to. The handy-dandy website is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. Our promo code of HYES lets you have the chance to enjoy a one-time 20% discount. Give it a try and find your new favorite. All right, that's that for the sponsor stuff. Let's talk about the dude getting drunk, shooting a gun, and wearing an eye patch. Bev?
And action! Have you ever seen
True Grit? Happy New Year, movie fans, and welcome to the 637th edition of the Classic Movies podcast called Have You Ever Seen? Our mission for more than 11 years has been to look back at old flicks and to spoil them. Pretty soon it's going to be 12 years. I'm a man who doesn't really have any grit, whether it be true or otherwise, Ryan Ellis. And here's my straight-talking wife, the lady who would love to murder Barry Pepper. Bev.
That's me.
Never been a Barry Pepper fan, have you?
I like Barry Pepper. I think he's a great actor. And he's Canadian. I just got mad because there was a couple movies where they cast him as like a good-looking guy who got hot chicks. And I was like, you can play a lot of things, Barry Pepper, but...
Not attractive?
A smoke show? Absolutely not. I cannot suspend my disbelief.
I admire your sand, Bev. I think that's what Damon says to Hailee Steinfeld in this at one point. All right, the coming attractions trivia question for True Grit, the first movie in the month of Bev 2025. Jeff Bridges was nominated for an Oscar for playing Rooster Cogburn in the 2010 True Grit, while John Wayne won an Oscar for playing Reuben Rooster Cogburn in the 1969 True Grit. But did Duke and the Dude ever appear in a movie together? Did anybody like their style, dude? Dude and Duke?
Key word is, did they ever appear in a movie together? They never worked together, but I was like, that's a weird question. And then I thought, oh, they were both technically in The Last Picture Show because the movie that airs in The Last Picture Show is Red River. Last Picture Show stars Jeff Bridges, and Red River stars John Wayne. Mm-hmm. So they show the movie in the movie. So while they never worked together, they did appear together in a movie.
It's a technicality, but yes.
It's a technicality, and I think you probably would have forgiven me if I said no, because they never worked together.
Well, I'll tell you right now that this, and I believe the next couple of movies, the trivia questions and the nutshells were very tough for me.
That's a great question, because it is technically true.
It also leads into the fact, if people don't know, that this was a movie before the Coen Brothers tackled it in 2010, and John Wayne was awarded for it, his only ever Oscar. All right, The Girl's the One with the Grit was released by Paramount 15 years ago on December 22nd, 2010. Okay, that's really just barely more than 14 years ago, but we like to go by the 5s and the 10s, and this film did come out in 2010. The budget was only about $38 million, but the film went on to rake in $171 million domestically and more than $250 million smackers worldwide. No other Coen film has grossed even half that much, domestically at least. It did well in all parts of the country too, and because it was PG-13, it drew in a wide variety of ages and demographics. So this movie is about as mainstream as these guys have ever been, and yet ironically, listen to the language. It's so odd and fits in with, say, Raising Arizona, that kind of language back then, and that movie wasn't some big hit. I know people love it, people like you, a lot of people love the movie, but it wasn't a monster hit by any means. Yet here this is with this kind of language and dialogue. But then again, it helps. You've got two very big stars in the two main roles. Well, actually, the main role is Hailee Steinfeld's role, and she's terrific, but Damon and Bridges, that helps too. You got big names. And Brolin, for that matter. And even Barry Pepper.
And I would argue it's not the first time they tried to be mainstream. Intolerable Cruelty. That movie was trying to be a straight, fun screwball comedy. Nobody wanted it, despite the fact that it had huge stars, and I thought it was a delightful movie. Everybody hates it for some reason.
Isn't that funny? That's the problem.
No, I guess
Especially by their standards.
Yeah, I guess by their standards, but they were trying to make, or it seemed as if they were trying to make a pretty mainstream film there. It just wasn't popular.
Love the way they write their screenplays and love the way they write their characters. But they do have odd language in a lot of them. Sometimes it's not that odd. It's more like the Fargo characters. That's the way people in that part of the world talk. So that's why they talk like that. But then something like this, Raising Arizona, so many other films where you could argue it feels like they're not, because they're so good, putting it on. A lot of directors, or writers too, would try this stuff and look completely ridiculous, as if they're trying to be twee. Maybe it'd be called twee. That's what Wes Anderson's always called. The Coens are never called twee, but this kind of thing could be if they weren't so good. And if they didn't cast great actors, that's a big part of it too.
You know what came across as twee? Drive Away Dolls.
Which
the language
Ethan did last
feels forced. It's awkward. I don't know if I would call it a failure, but you and I were not fans.
It's not funny. And it's the only time Matt Damon's worked with either of the Coens since this movie.
And it seems like it's just trying way too hard.
Yeah, it's not good. All right, Bev, the movie here is 14, going on 15 years old, whatever. Please give us the skinny on this teenager known as True Grit.
Hailee Steinfeld is Maddie Ross, a headstrong and unflappable 14-year-old girl dead set on avenging her father's murder in Arkansas. So she hires Jeff Bridges' Rooster Cogburn, the meanest marshal she can find, to track the killer, Josh Brolin's Tom Chaney, down. They're joined by Matt Damon's Texas Ranger, LaBeef, and they set out across Indian Territory, bickering all the way, until they come across the killer, Chaney, and his gang. Working together, they eventually thwart the gang, and Maddie herself gets to pull the trigger and kill Chaney. The recoil knocks her into a pit where she's bitten on the hand by a rattlesnake. Cogburn, having come to respect and care for Maddie, rides all night to get her to a doctor, carrying her for the last mile to save her life.
By the way, LaBeef, I love that they call him that, but it is spelled very similarly. I just checked, not the exact same, but similarly to Shia LaBeouf.
The French word for beef. Yeah.
But the spelling here is L-A and then capital B-O-E-U-F. And yet he himself, Damon's character, introduces himself as LaBeef.
Well, he's a very proud Texan. So even if his name is French, he probably would be more inclined to do the most anglicized possible pronunciation of it to be more American.
Can you imagine if Rooster had to spell that? We know he can't spell.
Oh, yeah.
Good line at the end.
Spelling is
at the end.
She worded.
His letter was Hertfeld, whatever else, but there are still many spelling mistakes.
Errors, yeah.
All right, well, in a nutshell, Dad's determined daughter hires Hunter to track Tom. Revenge required. She succeeds, although arm amputated. I went for alliteration because I looked at this last night for so many hours and finally came up with that.
It's like pretty much just saying plot to sum up somehow.
I guess it does nutshell the plot, doesn't it? But I like to try to be ironic and funny and a little left turn, but I didn't do that there. That's what happens. All right, the numbers on this movie, there's quite a few of them for a movie that is only 15 years old. AFI for one. I'll mention one thing briefly, but there's no AFI stuff because those lists were done, I think, by this point. Rotten Tomatoes critics, 95% of them say they like it. 263 fresh, 13 rotten, for an average of 8.3 out of 10, and 85% is what it gets on the popcorn meter, so from the audiences. The 1969 True Grit, Henry Hathaway directed that, by the way. John Wayne's in that, Robert Duvall, Dennis Hopper, I believe. Maddie is Kim Darby, I think is her name. Glenn Campbell is LaBeef. Anyway, that one's at 88% from the critics and 84% from the audiences, so not that far off. The audiences, it's almost the exact same number. The Coens' only splat is The Lady Killers.
Wow.
Well, I'm not counting the Ethan Coen movie, last year.
Drive Away Dolls.
I didn't count that. Anyway, those are the 5th best reviews of Bridges' career, and the 2nd best of Damon's acting career. I think it's Good Will Hunting is the only one that's higher than this. He's produced things that are higher ranked than this, but of his acting career, number 2. This was 13th at the 2010 U.S. box office. Inception was number 6. The King's Speech, the Best Picture winner, was number 18, and The Social Network was number 32, and all 3 of them competed with this for Best Picture, but of course The King's Speech did win. This opened number 2 at the box office in very late December 2010, behind Little Fockers, and then it was number 2 again the week after. Then a few weeks later, when we got into 2011, was number 1. It was that popular that actually gained, which is what happened when we were kids with movies. They would maybe be 3rd, but then be 1st for weeks on end.
Such high praise for a movie, too, I think, to have that build-up, because it means that people are either recommending it to their friends, insisting that they see it in a theater, or going back to see it a second time.
Yep.
What do you think it is about this movie that made it popular? Like,
this popular, especially by their standards.
There's like people who are going to see every Coen movie that comes out in the theater.
Like us.
Like us, right? But this movie must have appealed to the average viewer.
It helped that it wasn't rated R, even though it's very violent. Many people die. They don't swear, though.
It's also quite nihilistic. It's an optimistic movie, especially by the end, but God, it really presents the world as a pretty harsh place, right?
And she's hired somebody who, at one point, she has regrets about. She even says to LaBeef before he goes off,
Oh, I picked the wrong man.
I should have gone with you instead. Right, back to the numbers. There are a few more. It's the Oscars mostly. It was nominated for 10. This was a winner of none of them. It was up for Best Picture, the Coens for Best Director. I think the second time they'd ever been nominated together. Before it was Joel for Fargo, for example. Because back then, in those days, it was Joel was the director, Ethan was a producer, and they both wrote. And then Roderick James was the editing credit they took. But they always did all 4 jobs together. We just didn't know that officially until the early 2000s. Anyway, where was I? Oh, they were nominated for their adapted screenplay of Charles Portis's book. Jeff Bridges was up for Best Actor. Not really the lead in this movie, but the leading actress was up for Best Supporting Actress. Hailee Steinfeld, who's so good in this too.
Classic Oscars thing.
Because she's not known. She's making her debut here too.
She's 14. Or she was 13 when she did it.
13 when they were shooting. And Bridges is the big name. But it really should have been reversed for those candidacies. He won the year before for Crazy Heart, and that was a bit of a life achievement as well. He was good in the movie, but it was a bit of a life achievement. And he was up against Colin Firth both times. Firth won this year for The King's Speech. Roger Deakins' cinematography was also nominated. He was nominated with these guys so many times. Didn't win till many years later. The sets, the costumes, the sound, and the sound effects were also candidates for Oscars. Westerns don't typically get nominated for Oscars in the history of the show, especially in the more recent era, or wind up being big hits. But you got this one doing both.
Well, Unforgiven won, didn't it?
But that's also quite a long time before. That's nearly 20 years earlier.
Didn't High Noon also win Best Picture?
No, but it was up for Best Picture. Okay. But then we're talking nearly 60 years earlier.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm talking recent history. This is this century.
Recent history, our lifetime. Westerns just haven't been a real tentpole genre. You don't get a good Western or even... Well, you get Westerns every year. There's always going to be a couple, but... Studios aren't throwing big budgets at
they used
very
to be
many Westerns.
What I guess Marvel
superhero
is now.
Movies, yeah, I think so.
They were made very often. They were usually pretty successful, but they were rarely really recognized by serious things like the Oscars, except High Noon, maybe. The Searchers wasn't nominated for anything big, though. Yeah. Anything at all.
Neither are Marvel movies. If it's considered too popular, then the Oscars just don't mess with them.
Yeah. The one AFI recognition I'll mention is that John Wayne's Rooster Cogburn character was 36th on the AFI's top 50 heroes list. Of course, Bridges couldn't make it because... I think that list was long before this movie was made. All right, well, this is your first choice this month. Obviously, you like it a lot. I'm a fan, too. Maybe not as much as some other people are, but what do you think about True Grit?
I just love it. When you read reviews, a lot of people complain that this is the Coens on easy mode because it is a straightforward, crowd-pleasing story. Like you said, it's not R-rated. And I guess that's true. It's not as challenging or deep as something like A Serious Man that they made right before, or Inside Llewyn Davis, which was their film after this.
Or as goofy as Burn After Reading, which was 2 years before.
Yeah, and they're just more challenging movies that are out there and stand out as very much Coen Brothers movies and what their fans want. But if you were to judge this film by the standards that you judge any other filmmaker, you would consider it a masterpiece. Oh, it's so beautiful. The performances are outstanding. The writing is incredible. I think it's one of the best Westerns of the 21st century. I don't even think that's debatable.
Of all time, no, but of the last 5 years, sure. I guess one of the reasons why I don't rank this quite as high, just like I said about No Country, we covered that quite a few years ago. Although I like that more as time has gone on. I've always thought it was good, but I do think it's better as I've gotten older. But part of the problem is that movie wasn't what they were known for. And I saw it when I was hearing about the Oscar buzz, and they won 3 Oscars that night. And I thought, but Fargo is a better movie, and I like it more. Lebowski wasn't recognized for anything back in the day. Now they win for this. This isn't funny. It's not what they're good at. And then True Grit is certainly funnier, but they are getting away from what they often do. But then maybe that's harder for them because it isn't up their alley. It'd be like Spielberg making a complete weeper romantic love story. This isn't what you're best at. If you can, well, I guess he did with West Side Story, but okay, whatever the better example might be, I don't know. Cronenberg making a completely simple, plain love story would be unusual for him, I guess. Or Nolan not killing off the wife. How about that? That would be stretching himself.
Nolan making a movie that ends with a wedding.
Actually, one tie-in I think it really has with No Country, and that's also a Western of a sort, but a modern Western, just because it's out in the Old West and Josh Brolin wears a cowboy hat.
I agree.
But anyway,
I totally agree.
The other tie-in, in a way, is that a lot of people that didn't like that movie felt they were shortchanged by the conflict and what they thought was going to be either all 3 of them fighting each other, or at least a couple of them fighting each other. And apart from the shootout where the 2 guys, Brolin and Bardem, are never on screen together, they are shooting at each other, and they're both in the scene, but they never actually are shown on camera or anything like that. So in a way, it's not their scene together. But at the end, Brolin dies. Other people do that. Those Mexicans kill him off for the money, I guess, that he's got in that suitcase. And Bardem gets away, but supposedly Jones is right there in the hotel with him. We don't know for sure. And Jones quits the job because he can't stand the way the world is now. This movie, in some ways, has a similarity. The climax is a fairly typical climax. She kills the guy she wanted to kill, gets revenge and justice that she always wanted.
His death is rather anticlimactic. Even though we do
True.
get to see it, it certainly doesn't feel like the climax of the film.
But she achieves what she wanted, and he's a villain here, and he's the quote-unquote hero in that, or at least our protagonist.
Same actor, too.
Yeah, exactly. And she's with Bridges and Damon before she passes out, so she has a final scene with them both in a way. But at the very end of the story, after decades have passed, she never saw LaBeef again when Bridges rode her off on her own pony, Blackie, to try to save her life. And then he made sure she was okay. Bridges did. Rooster did. But then he left before she actually came to and was okay. So she never saw these two ever again. So in a way, it's that No Country thing as well. And yet people didn't have a problem with it this time. Maybe because the actual climax of the movie is not typical, but we've seen that kind of thing in many films. I got to kill this guy. I killed this guy. I got him.
And they kill the gang as well. They have that great climax there, and everybody gets their hero moment because Rooster gets
Fill your hands!
He gets to go and face them head on, take them out. LaBeef gets that shot, that 1 in a million shot. He does it. Even he's impressed by himself. And then Matty gets to pull the trigger and actually kill Cheney. But the real hero moment is when Rooster saves Matty. Fine, they got their guys, but we all know that wasn't the real story. The real story isn't a revenge story. The real story is the way that her father figure and the way that she has this tremendous influence on these two grown men. Her character's incredible. I love her so much. She's so completely, hopelessly herself, and she disarms everyone around her. It's like she has no ego. It doesn't even occur to her to care how she's presented to other people. And then she's
I think she's called ugly, by the way.
Yeah.
Hailee Steinfeld, so ugly.
Oh, yeah, I know. It's a bit of a stretch to say the least, but they're just trying to get to her. What could insult a girl more than calling her ugly? And she is insulted, but she's also not fazed by it. Mm-hmm. And then you have LaBeef and Rooster, who are men who would never admit it, but are all ego. Their egos are so important to them. And just by leading by example, she breaks that down. She breaks it out of them. And they just come to respect her and want to live up to her standards by the end, that they do become those heroes. They kind of experience this humility. And the catharsis is not killing Cheney, as much as that's so important to her. Even she doesn't seem to experience catharsis with it. The catharsis is Rooster rising to the occasion and behaving like a father.
Riding all night long to try to save her life.
There's that beautiful opening shot. We are lucky to be alive at the same time as Roger Deakins.
Her father laying dead in the snow?
Father laying dead in the snow. So the shot begins. You talked about No Country for Old Men, and I totally agree that there are connections between the two movies, even if it's just thematically. I subscribe to this great YouTube channel called Learning About Movies. Pretty generic name. It's hosted by Josh Matthews. I think he's a professor. He is really good at talking about movies. And he made a connection with that first image because it starts out of focus. And at first you think you're looking at a fire in the distance because there's this warm, glowing orange light and it seems to be flickering or moving. It seems to have life to it. And the shot slowly comes into focus and then you start to say, no, that's not a fire. I think I'm looking at the image of a cross. And then it comes more and more into focus and you say, oh, no, that's a doorway, and those are two lights on either side of the doorway, and just the way that the light hits makes it look like a cross, and the more that it's illuminated, and as it comes into focus, we discover it's not a hearth, it's not a cross, it's a murder scene, and this man's dead body is lying there, and Josh Matthews made this connection to the speech that ends No Country for Old Men, where Tommy Lee Jones describes a dream he had about his father going ahead of him on a mountain pass. And he's like, I couldn't see him, but I knew he was making a fire. And I knew that when I reached that destination, he would be waiting for me. And he's describing death, the Coens love to explore the theme of death in their films. So that movie ends with this image of a fire in the distance. And this movie starts with an image of a fire in the distance that then, of course, reveals itself to be a scene of death, scene of her father's death.
And then also she walks off at the very end when she's a grown woman. She's moved Rooster's body to her grave where she lives from where it was, wherever the hell that was, because he was so special to her, even though she never saw him again after all those decades. But she's walking off, and it's a body double they used. So Elizabeth Marvel plays her as the grown woman and as the voiceover, but she has more vocal time than she has screen time. Her face isn't shown much anyway, but whenever you see the missing arm, That was somebody named Ruth Morris, who they used as the body double. So walking away at the very end, I think it's the last shot of the whole film. That's not even Elizabeth Marvel. That's the body double because of the arm missing.
By the way, I learned that Elizabeth Marvel is married to Bill Camp.
Oh, great character actor.
Yeah, who's in Drive-Away Dolls. Has a small part in Drive-Away Dolls.
Right, yeah.
That last shot is also really beautiful and significant. Speaking of death, the last scene takes place in a cemetery. She never gets to reunite with Rooster. She buries him next to her father, we presume, in the family plot. Mm-hmm. You have this beautiful wide shot of her on the hilltop, and the graves are in relief, and she's like a silhouette. She's dressed in black like a figure of death herself.
Or like she's mourning, even though he's been dead for a little while and she hasn't seen him in so long. Yeah. And you point out when we're watching the very end that it looks like, I guess it's the body double, is walking in place like she's on a treadmill. And maybe she was, so she wouldn't go over the hill. But it could just be that it's such a long, flat surface that it looks like she's walking forever.
Yeah, and they just use an extremely long lens, I suppose.
But it also could be that she is walking on a treadmill to stay in one place.
They aren't above using surrealist imagery. The scene where she is on the horse with Rooster and he's trying to get her back in time to save her life, visually it starts to get really surreal and dreamlike, probably because it's her perspective of somebody who's probably feverish and crazy and dying.
She is definitely feverish. By the way, this is the second straight movie I've covered of Roger Deakins. In a row? No, not in a row, because being there interrupted the two.
Oh, Prisoners.
But I covered Prisoners, and now we're doing this today. He was nominated for both movies. And what's in both movies? My favorite thing in the world, snakes. There's all kinds of snakes in Prisoners, and there's a few rattlesnakes, or what somebody says are rat snakes, but they look like rattlesnakes, sound like rattlesnakes to me. And the one bites her on the hand. That's why he has to race her off, because she shoots Janie and falls into a mine. Had she just fallen straight back or not into the mine, success, they would have won. And they did win, but fate, I guess you could say, ruins the fact that they could have ridden off together, taken the bodies. They would have gotten, I guess, some kind of reward for Janie in Texas. That would have been something LaBeef would have done, and she got what she wanted. She didn't want to see him hang in Texas. She wanted it either done by her or done in Arkansas. But that happened, so he could take the body. Maybe he did take the body off. He probably did. But we may have seen all those things in a typical Western.
When it's all said and done, she doesn't really seem to care what happens to his body. In the whole coda, where it's her 25 years later, she doesn't talk about Cheney at all. Yep. She doesn't talk about revenge. That just doesn't seem to be top of mind. It's her relationship with Rooster that's so important. There's this beautiful line in her monologue. I think it's at the top of the film. There's the bookend voiceovers where she narrates. She says, "There's nothing free except the grace of God. Tom Cheney must pay for his deeds with his life. And I think that Maddie has to pay for her deed because it is a sin. She kills a man out of revenge with her arm. What could be a more biblical, godlike symbol than a snake itself claiming her arm immediately after she kills the man? I don't say it's like a really biblical, religious, Christian movie.
It does start with a proverb that says, "The wicked flee when none pursueth." Although the wicked was fleeing anyway, whether they pursueth or not.
But she says he could have walked that horse. Nobody was following him. And she has to pursue justice. Yeah. Her theme song in the movie
they use it constantly. Leaning on the everlasting arms.
Yeah, which film fans will recognize from Night of the Hunter, and there's lots of other...
Yeah, he sings it all the time. Robert Mitchum does.
Yeah, when he's stalking his prey.
Leaning on the everlasting arms.
And what more famous image is there from that movie than the silhouette, extreme wide shot, he's on a hilltop, casually walking his horse, and you only see him in silhouette, but you can hear his singing. The second last shot of the movie is Maddie in silhouette from the distance, walking away from the graveyard, mirroring that famous shot from Night of the Hunter. But she's the hunter in this movie, right?
And Carter Burwell uses that in this score. In fact, he wasn't nominated for an Oscar. Maybe he wouldn't have been anyway for his score. He's never been nominated for a score that he wrote for the Coens. But it's partly because the music is based on so many pre-existing hymns that wasn't eligible, which is what happened with the Godfather score. That was based on enough previous Italian films that Nino Rota, who should have been nominated for one of the most famous scores of all time, wasn't because it was based on other things. This is in 1873 in Arkansas, by the way, although they shot in, where was it again, New Mexico and Texas, and that's where No Country was shot. They shot that in Marfa, I believe it was, Texas, where There Will Be Blood was also shooting, and Giant shot in Marfa many years before. This isn't Marfa, but it is in Texas, but it's mostly, I think, in New Mexico. Just earlier that year, too. It wasn't like it was a year before. They started shooting in March. Then the movie's out late December.
Did they shoot in winter?
March to May.
So I wonder how much of that snow was real. You could see the actor's breath. It was cold. That must have been a miserable
Well, you'd
shoot.
get up in the mountains, maybe part of it as well. It would still be chilly in March, and you could have a late winter, though, too. Sometimes winters really last into April, at least up here sometimes that happens.
It's a very wintry movie. Oh, and I love the touch with Maddie. At the beginning of the film, she's so unhappy about sleeping at the Undertaker's, and then she hates sharing a bed with the grandmother at the inn, and they really make a point of showing that. It's silly for jokes. But we never once see her complain about sleeping on the ground in the cold, getting snowed on, out in the open. She never complains much at all once they're out there.
And they're in Indian territory, so they're at risk of being... I'm not blaming the natives if they would be killed. They're in their territory.
But they're not protected by American law. That's the point. They know that the lawmen won't go out and seek Cheney out. Cheney thinks he's safe in Indian territory, so they have to go to Indian territory to find him.
And one of them, I guess both of them actually are lawmen themselves. You got the Marshal Rooster Cogburn, and you've got whatever LaBeef's rank is.
He's a Texas Ranger. Come on, he's right. He's
well, I was thinking
proud.
lieutenant or captain or whatever it is. I guess that doesn't matter. He's just a Texas Ranger, yeah. Interesting casting, by the way. Looking on Wikipedia, there was one review that was referenced. The guy didn't like the movie, and he said that Damon's badly miscast.
I think I read that same review.
I don't love his casting either.
I disagree. I love him in this movie. Go on.
He's a little too old,
like
for one thing. Cast a younger guy to play him, and then that's what it is. Glenn Campbell is so much younger than John Wayne in the other True Grit. Or get somebody who seems like he is more Jeff Bridges' generation, rather than being somebody who could be, I think, literally his son. There's nothing wrong with that father-son dynamic. LaBeef is always needling Cogburn, especially when Cogburn starts drinking so much and then can't hit the broadside of a barn until he does. Oh, throw that thing up there again. I'll hit it this time. Bridges is good. I don't know if he's Oscar-worthy exactly. He didn't win anyway. He was nominated. It's Steinfeld. She's so fantastic in her very first film. I also saw somebody call her a pill, which is also true. You've been saying that about Lisa Simpson. We're rewatching the show. Once in a while, we'll watch The Simpsons. When we have dinner, that's a pretty common thing. And Lisa can be funny, but so much of the time in that show, she was a pill. As is Maddie, but she speaks so well. She's funny because she's so deadly serious all the time. And what a clear-eyed performance from a 13-year-old girl who's actually playing older. It's so rare. Usually you'd cast somebody who's 18, 19, 20, who's playing 13 or 14, but she's younger than the 14-year-old she's actually playing by a year only, but still. And then they had to use double sometimes because she can't be up late at night when she's that young. In fact, a lot of times, if it's not her face on camera, especially if it's nighttime, it's not her.
And what a value add to get an actor who's actually the correct age. I don't like it when people are cast way off the age they're actually supposed to be playing. So they had an open casting call of 15,000 actors to play Maddie. And it made her a star, as it should. She's incredible. She's very natural. She's totally committed. She makes that formal language sound totally believable. She brings a ton of charisma to the part. You root for Maddie from the moment you see her marching across town. And that amazing scene, which is her introduction, where she's bargaining with the horse guy who's like, oh, this little girl is trying to pull one over on her. He doesn't take her seriously at all. And she's just so persistent and stalwart and savvy.
It is our most modestly priced receptacle. Reminds me of that scene in Big Lebowski when they're arguing about, you got Ralphs around here.
But a lot of people say that's their favorite scene in the movie. She's impossible. You would certainly not want to be on the other side of that table from her. Mm-hmm. But you're just so impressed by her bargaining skills. And when she comes back and buys the pony at the end, you just want to cheer, right? She's so great. But Steinfeld herself, she really does have that X factor.
She's never been better than she was in her first movie.
When you see Edge of 17 or the Hawkeye series, she sparkles. She has so much screen presence.
She's good. She's better than this.
I'm not saying like as an actor. I'm just saying that charisma.
Well, she's a singer, too. I think she actually sings more than she acts.
Really?
That's what I was reading online. I didn't know she was such a singer. Well,
I knew she was a singer, but I didn't think
movies,
that it was...
Right?
Oh, I didn't even know she was in those movies.
Well, then she's also in a movie that I will always stump for whenever it comes up, and she's the daughter of Mark Ruffalo in it, and it's Begin Again.
Oh, I forgot. That's right. She does. Yeah.
Once
she plays guitar in that movie, too.
She isn't singing it, I don't think at all, but she plays guitar. What did I say? Pitch Perfect? I'm scrolling through. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm not wrong. Let's see. Is she not in one of them at least? Pitch Perfect 3. She's in that one for sure.
Okay, there you go.
Maybe it's only that one. But
I've only seen the first one.
Oh, and then as I scroll through her resume, music video. There's a ton of them. She's in Pitch Perfect too. Anyway, yeah, I think she's great from the very beginning of her career and has probably never come close to this, but that's not an insult.
It's a Coen movie. If the first movie you do is with the Coen Brothers, well, sorry, you're probably never going to top that, but it did make her a movie star. But I think she was a movie star in the making. If it wasn't this, I feel like someone else probably would have discovered her. She's also beautiful and so multi-talented, like you said.
I think she's willing to sleep with the corpses rather than pay for a hotel. And the corpses of 3 men we saw hang. Mm-hmm. The brutal snap sound when they all hang, and when the native guy tries to pipe up, the hood goes over his face right away. He doesn't get to say anything.
He gets to sing for the briefest moment. They do not care. That scene, and there's another scene where Rooster kicks those kids, presumably because they were throwing rocks at the horse. That's the rationalization. Yeah. But there is these little reminders, even though they're in Indian country, they have this total disregard for...
He's right about kicking the kids, though, or doing whatever he did to those kids, because I don't care what their race is. They were being dicks. They were torturing that horse for no good reason.
That's rationalization, but do you think he would have done that to white kids regardless?
He might have. I think in that case, yes.
Okay. The movie makes a point of making them native
There's
kids.
An underpinning of that. There aren't that many natives in this movie, even though they are in Indian territory.
Well, they do have good faith bargaining with the guy that they come across. I forget his name, but there's a native guy. Not the bear man. There's a native guy that they come across and they trade something.
The bear man, by the way, I thought maybe it was Barry Corbin who plays, I guess it's supposed to be Tommy Lee Jones's uncle at the end of No Country, the second last scene in the whole movie.
Oh, the guy from Northern Exposure.
That's Barry Corbin. This guy is Ed Lee Corbin, who plays Bearman. Or Ed Corbin's his usual credit. It's not the same person. I don't know if they're related. But that was a great shot in the trailer when this guy comes up with a bear head on top of his own head. And it isn't as sinister as it seems like it's going to be when you see the trailer.
One of those Coen touches that they love to have these really interesting side characters that we never really learn that much about, but add so much character to the film and to the time and place.
Another subtext, and this is in a lot of Westerns actually, is that this is not that long after the end of the Civil War. And Damon's character is supposed to be on the side of the Union, I guess, while Rooster was with
the Confederacy.
And this is one of those movies, we haven't seen that many over the years, where I'm fighting sleep, and it's not the movie's fault. I fall asleep often in the early evening, and usually when we watch movies for the podcast, I stay awake, and I don't have a problem with it, maybe because I'm so active typing, but this is when I fought it a little bit, and it's so dense with the language that I may have missed some things, but in reading about it later on, Rooster, in some ways at least, was with the South, which is also true about John Wayne's character, not in, maybe in True Grit, I guess, too. I don't know, I haven't seen that in a long time, but in The Searchers. But it seems like he was maybe infiltrating them or something like that. So that's part of the subtext and flavor of these two guys battling all the time. I don't know that it really, truly works. And then when Damon has his tongue bitten off by himself and he has to talk that way for about half the movie, it doesn't help. I didn't love the interaction between the two of those guys. I think it's good. It's a B- for me. And in so many other movies, the interaction with the characters, Big Lebowski, good example, Fargo, so many examples of that. It's the best part of the whole film. And this, she's great. But those two guys together, it didn't really work for me. It's just okay at best. And I think it's Damon, who I usually love.
Yeah. I love Damon.
But even Bridges is laying it on thick. That's the way it was written. I don't know if he's misplaying it. He, in a way, is playing the Goodman character in The Big Lebowski, because that's laying it on thick, too. But he's still funny. We don't have a problem with it.
And he's not the lead character, so
true.
He gets to be the goofy side character.
But you love the interaction, obviously.
I do. I love them together. I just love Matt Damon as an actor so much, and he's not really like your classical hero here at all. I think he actually does like to go against his typical everyman hero persona.
He's a terrible person in that Ethan Coen movie.
You can see him having fun with this part. You can see him really digging into the character. And
it was his turn from the big three of the Ocean's movies, because Clooney worked with the Coens several times by this point, and still at least one more time in Hail Caesar. And Pitt did Burn After Reading a couple years before this, so it was Damon's turn to work with them, I guess. And here's the most successful movie. So I guess he could say, your movies made no money, mine made a ton of money.
Yeah, that's it. It's all him.
This is also not one of the very first movies, but he wasn't that well known. I don't know if I knew who he was at this point. Brendan Gleeson's son, Domhnall, or Donal? Is it?
Domhnall. Rhymes with tonal.
Okay, right. Even though it's spelled...
The spelling is insane.
Domhnall. So he's Moon, the kid who is cornered in the trading post, I guess it is, and his friend stabs him, or the friend gets shot by Rooster when he turns on him, but they're the ones that effectively sell out Cheney, understandably. They're the ones that say he'll be coming back here to do some trading. And it's actually one of the great shots of the whole film, too, even though the opening's the best shot in the whole movie. Best looking shot, I mean. But when the Pepper gang rides in, Barry Pepper wears those chaps that are white fur.
Sheepskin.
Okay, there you go. And you can see that. You probably wouldn't see it in reality at nighttime, even with the moon.
You can when Deacons is the cinematographer.
But with a movie, you can. And so he stands out. And he's barely in the movie, as is Brolin. We see a little bit more of Brolin than we do Pepper, but not much more. Pepper probably has more dialogue than Brolin does, though, too. But you know it's those guys. Well, maybe you don't the first time you see the movie. Later on, you know it's those guys coming to that trading post, which is what Domhnall Gleeson and the other guy said was going to happen. They were going to come back there that night. So this is a very violent movie. A lot of people die. But there's no blood, I don't think, not blatantly anyway. And as I said, no language, no nudity. That's why it's PG-13. But it is a brutal movie. Mean-spirited killings.
The West was mean. And it's not trying to put a bow on it or baby the audience about the truth of what it was like to live back then. And there are no sissies here. No one is tender or fragile. No one suggests that there's any justice for Maddie other than death for Tom Chaney. Nobody says, well, maybe we should let the law take care of it. They're like, yeah, of course. Avenge your father. Kill this man. Or bring him in to be hung. No.
That's typical for Westerns, though, in the history of cinema, especially.
It's probably typical for the time and place.
I think maybe...
sure there were people that were against the death penalty at that time, but the scene at the trading post has one of my favorite lines in the movie, one of my favorite lines in a Coen film, when he promises Donald Gleason that if he tells them what they want to know, he knows he's dying. So he said, well, if you tell us what we want to know, we'll give you a Christian burial. And he tells him, and then he basically mercy kills him. Later, as they're leaving his body, just sitting up against the edge of the trading post with the others, and Maddie's like, you promised him a Christian burial. And he says, if he wanted a Christian burial, then he would have gotten himself killed in the summertime.
Yeah, right.
Even Maddie doesn't argue. Lisa Simpson would never let that go, of course, but Maddie is realistic. She's very pragmatic. Maybe that's the word. It's so pragmatic. Yeah. Every time they butt up against reality, they accept reality immediately and carry on. Well, I guess Maddie doesn't because she keeps getting told no. But when it comes to stuff like that, we can't bury him. The ground is frozen. Interesting,
another touch with Prisoners that Deacon shot is that at the end of that movie, they're searching the property of the bad woman, and they can't fully check the property and dig everywhere because they say the ground's frozen. Maybe it shouldn't be in early December in Pennsylvania, but that's what they say. Same issue here.
Yeah.
Although this actually is the winter, and they don't have the supplies and abilities in 1873 that someone would have in 2013.
But audiences obviously were okay with this. This is such a popular movie.
Humor helps a lot because it is pretty funny. But then also, Cogburn does try to quit. Trail's gone cold. Understandably so, and for that matter, LaBeef rides off, twice on them? Gives up on them? And of course, for a long time, he doesn't respect Maddie. He spanks her by the river when she crosses over with her horse, and maybe would make her leave. I don't know how he could really truly make her leave, but at least not be with him if it was just him. But because Rooster pulls out his gun, it makes him stop. But then there's a conflict with the three of them often in the movie. She, for the most part, is taken care of by Rooster, and more so towards the end, she's taken care of by LaBeef. But at first, LaBeef's one saying, get out of here, you little girl, I'm spanking you on the bum.
Earlier in the film, he was thinking about giving her a kiss. She's old enough to kiss and young enough to spank.
There is sexual tension with the two of them, and I think that's why she says in the voiceover at the end that if he was alive, she'd like to see him again. I think the implication being that maybe we could see if we can make something happen. We don't know if he's living or dead at the end, though, do we?
She doesn't know if he's living. She says, I think he would be about in his 70s now, but she can't find him.
Rooster died 3 days before she got there to the Younger and James, so one of the Younger brothers. That's an actual name. Younger is a name. And I guess Frank James, not Jesse James. Those guys actually ran together with another family or another couple of brothers. What's it, The Long Riders that was made where I think it's 3 sets of brothers, including the Jameses. Real people. It's not some fable. Oh. They're the ones that she talks to when she gets to the show. But he's not alive anymore. They're the ones that tell her that. What about one of the key moments in this movie, and of course in the original True Grit, when Cogburn faces down 4 guys, fill your hands, pulls out 2 pistols and puts the reins in his mouth to try to control the horse and manages to win, which he should not do. But then you could argue that Barry Pepper's guys, I like that by the way, Barry Pepper's playing Ned Pepper, Lucky Ned Pepper. They may not be great shots. Maybe they're good at other things, but they're not very good shots. And he does manage to survive. Well, he would have been killed for sure had LaBeef not made that incredible 400-yard shot away. But the other point is that Ned Pepper was going to die. He just would have killed Rooster before he did die. Cool scene. It's actually more fun, I think, in the original movie, because that's a more fun movie than this is. It's playing off of John Wayne being the fat old man. He even calls himself that, I think, several times. Bridges is not thin in this. He's not a fat old man the same way that Wayne was in 1969.
Classic Coens, they don't make that the center of attention. We're so locked into Maddie's perspective of things. So we're watching it from her vantage point on the cliff, helplessly. You know that he's in danger, but you're just stuck up there watching from a distance.
He also was supposed to have ridden away, and he shot off his gun to imply that he did. Even though he is playing one of the villains, I like the way that it's written and the way that Barry Pepper plays it, that he has more honor than a character like that often has. He's the one saying, don't touch that girl till I come back, or you will not get paid.
Yeah, he's smart and savvy. You look at him on the surface.
He talks to her with respect as well.
Yes, and he's clever about how he's operating here under the circumstances.
He had nothing to do with her father being killed either. Yeah, he's hiding out the guy who did it, and maybe he doesn't know that. Maybe he does. I guess he does know that. But there's an element of honor to Ned Pepper, even though he's going to kill a guy before he died. But that is the West for you.
Also, just a side touch, because you were talking about how he shot his gun at some point to communicate with them. Over and over, we see people communicating just through shooting their guns in the air.
Well,
right up to the point where he's trying to get the doctor's attention.
Yeah, he was going to collapse outside the doctor's
place. He
place.
Can't make it. I'll shoot my gun and it'll bring somebody out here.
Otherwise, they both would have just collapsed right there and died.
He would die just like the horse.
Yeah, she would have died of the snake venom. And although he does try to cut it out and spit it out, I guess it just lessened it. Didn't get rid of all of it, obviously. So Jeff Bridges, we've covered him 5 times now because he was in Last Picture Show, of course, The Fisher King, The Big Lebowski, and Iron Man a couple years before this came out. And then I covered him doing Seabiscuit with Chris on Scoring at the Movies. We did that quite a few years ago. Both he and Wayne, by the way, were in their 60s when they played Cogburn, but Wayne seems so much older, maybe because he was the smoker and probably a drinker. And what they say when he died, they found 17 tons of undigested meat in his colon or something.
Oh, God.
I'm making up a number, but it was a lot. I don't think he was a healthy person. He died of cancer about 10 years after he made True Grit, in fact. Bridges wears the eye patch in this movie, of course, as did Wayne in the other one, but he wears it on the right eye, which is apparently accurate to the novel. I didn't read why Wayne wore it on the left, maybe because he would have said to the director, my right eye is my dominant eye. I'm going to see better if I do this.
The left is the sinister side. So it could honestly be like a method of communication.
And we first meet Rooster. He's testifying in court about how he killed people. Now, it seems like it's doing his job, but he was a murderer before she ever met him. And she picked the guy when the dude's telling her about 3 options she could take off to ride with her to find Cheney. She wants the meanest one.
And in the court scene, even he doesn't seem convinced that he was justified in killing these people. He gets away with it, but she likes him for it. It says a lot about him and his character in that moment, and a lot about her and her character.
And the line True Grit is said by her about him. She needs someone with true grit, but really it's her that has the true grit. So I talked about how she was in Begin Again and the Pitch Perfect movies and so on. But also, we have covered her before. If you're going to remember this, it's a voice role.
Into the Spider-Verse. Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse.
Matt Damon, though, we've covered him a ton of times. This is the 9th plus 4 with Chris on Scoring at the Movie. So Good Will Hunting, Saving Private Ryan, Dogma, The Talented Mr. Ripley, The Bourne Identity, The Departed, Contagion, and Oppenheimer, although not that many of those are leading roles. So a lot of them are supporting parts for him, and small ones, like not that small, I guess, in Dogma, but he's not the most important part of that film by any means. Then he was in Rounders, The Legend of Bagger Vance, Invictus, and Ford versus Ferrari on Scoring at the Movies.
Damon is the great everyman movie star of his generation.
For sure, yeah. Mm-hmm. Barry Pepper was in Saving Private Ryan, so with Damon, and has, I guess, a couple scenes with him anyway towards the end. And 25th Hour, which we covered a couple years ago, and he's in 61 Asterisk on Scoring at the Movies, where he's indisputably the star of that movie. Josh Brolin was in No Country for Old Men and Milk. He was nominated for that a couple years before this came out. He's been Thanos and Cable in the MCU, so he's been in some giant hits like that. And then lately with Denis Villeneuve. He's been in several films for him, I think, now. One of the Sicarios, I think he's in the first Sicario that Villeneuve directed, and he's been in the last 2 Dune, so at least those. Dakin Matthews, he's the colonel that she bargains with, Colonel Stonehill. He was in thousands of TV shows, or at least hundreds of them. You look online, TV show. But he was also in Lincoln and Bridge of Spies for Spielberg, and Spielberg was an executive producer on this movie. He worked with the Coens a few times because they were the writers on Bridge of Spies, I believe, or maybe 2 of the writers.
You might say he has a small part.
But it's vital.
And he's so great. That's everybody's favorite scene in this movie. How is that possible? Mm-hmm. But when you see the scene, you get it.
It is our most modestly priced reception.
Well, he's just so flabbergasted at her, the way his reactions are.
Just because of Marie, that doesn't make us saps. Donald Gleason, who's one of the sons in Mother. That's the other film we've covered before. Of course, he's in the Star Wars sequels. And he does a lot of prestige stuff, so he is not as big a name as his father is. Brendan's done some incredible things, but he's building his resume. Still fairly young, I guess. Elizabeth Marvel, who is on screen a little bit and has some voiceover in the beginning and the ending as the older Maddie. She's in House of Cards. She's Heather on that. And she's the president, at least at some point, on Homeland, which we used to watch, but we gave up on long before it was over.
Yeah, she's a great character actor. She's one of those actors, once you recognize her face, you start seeing her everywhere.
Fitting that she's married to Bill Camp, because somebody said recently online, one of those dumb things people say, there are no good character actors anymore. There are plenty, and Bill Camp is Exhibit A of that.
Yeah. There's
if you don't know who we're talking about, look him up. You've seen him before.
No good character actors. That's
one of the reasons why he is a good character actor is because pick one role you think of as a Bill Camp thing. I'm not sure what one it would be. That's how good an actor he is, but he's not a star. The last name I'll mention is J.K. Simmons, who has a voiceover as her lawyer. He was in The Lady Killers and Burn After Reading for these guys, maybe more, but those 2 anyway, and of course won the Oscar for The Great Whiplash 4 years after this film came out. As for the Coens, it's the writers and directors and producers, and the editors for that matter too, but this is the 9th time we've covered them, like Damon, 9 times. Raising Arizona, Fargo, The Big Lebowski, Oh Brother Where Art Thou, The Man Who Wasn't There, No Country for Old Men, A Serious Man, and Inside Llewyn Davis. That's way more than half the movies they've ever made. I'm sure we'll get to more of them in the years ahead. Oh, we're going to probably do Blood Simple in a few months, in Revenge Month. They wrote the screenplay based on Charles Portis's 1968 novel, so they made True Grit, the movie, the first one that John Wayne won, a year after that came out. And they produced, along with Scott Rudin, that same trio won the Oscar for Best Picture for No Country for Old Men. Film is 239-1. We watched our Blu-ray. Looked pretty snazzy. The opening shot, great example. We've talked about how some of the opening titles of some of the movies we've seen on DVD lately have looked terrible, but then the movies look okay, or even on Disney+. This was the opening shot, not a title shot, but it was a beautiful movie throughout, I think. Deakins shot it. He was still shooting on film, and this may have been the last time he did. He's been on digital ever since. Impressive, he won his 2 Oscars when he did digital shooting, because he did win for Blade Runner 2049 and 1917. He so often worked with the Coens and Scorsese back in the day sometimes, and Darabont.
But also Villeneuve, obviously.
Villeneuve and Sam Mendes as well. The editors were the Coens themselves. They cut all their own, I think literally every movie they've ever made. Sometimes they have Trisha Cook, Ethan's wife, as one of the editors. They weren't nominated this time, though. Maybe they should have been. Pretty well edited film. And then Carter Burwell, who worked with the Coens more often than not. Most of the time they've made a film. He also composed Adaptation, one of my favorite comedies ever, and Carol, which I believe he was nominated for. He's got 2 nominations, but never for the Coen films. And the music in this, Leaning on the Everlasting Arms, was a pretty effective thing there. So, I know you think the look is good, the cutting, the music, the writing, all of it. Go ahead.
Oh, the technicals are immaculate. Sometimes they lean a little too heavily on the score, but that's a taste thing for me as well. The costumes and production design, perfect.
And they were nominated for those things, at least, costumes and the sets. What happens next? Well, they tell us what eventually happens next in the movie, because we see many years in the future when Hailee Steinfeld turns into Elizabeth Marvel. I think she makes more of an effort to find LaBeef than she seems to at the very end. She liked the cut of his jib, and now she's old enough to share some bedroom time with him.
If she wanted to share bedroom time with anybody, she probably would have found somebody in the intervening
but she never
25
got married.
years.
Never got married. The old Western movie language, that usually means she's never been with anybody. She's not somebody who's been with a guy in a casual way.
I feel like it would be a loss for Maddie Ross to get married.
Is it maybe
to a man in any way
that she's a lesbian?
Oh, that's totally possible. She's so man-like. All of her character traits are what we typically associate with masculine
You wonder if
traits.
she was in charge in the Ross house even when her dad was alive and home.
And I think that she was probably the most like her father. Part of the reason why she loves him, part of the reason why she feels so responsible for him. No matter what her mother says, she completely ignores. She's getting letters about her mother sending her home. She's like, whatever.
I'm busy, yeah.
I totally guess that she goes home and at 14 years old just takes over the household and takes the place of her father.
Especially after what she just did, what she's been part of.
Yeah.
Okay, then last thoughts on your first movie in the 10th Annual Month O Bev? True Grit.
Well, like most Coen Brothers films, this gets better every time I watch it. It's just such a pleasure and a gift, even if it is the most audience-friendly movie or
one of
the less challenging Coen Brothers films. Then it's for those days when you feel like the Coens, but you just want to enjoy yourself.
The sun didn't get in your eyes. That is to say, your eye. I don't love his accent either. Another problem with Damon. This feels a little bit made up, which it is, but it feels like it's made up.
He would make it up.
But he's from Texas. He should sound like he does, but he sounds phony.
But he is a phony.
Okay. Anyway, I like the film a lot, certainly more than the original, which I don't remember. I saw it a long time ago. It was fine. This is cool. We didn't say that really, but it is a cool movie, I think, too. It's a fun ride, despite the violence and murder constantly happening. The script uses language so well. The guys are pretty good, but Steinfeld's probably never been better than she was in her very first movie, and it's her movie. But having said all that, I don't like it quite as much as you and other people do. I'd say 3 stars out of 4 for sure, but I think a lot of people are closer to 4, 3.5 to 4, if not you and other people. So that was how we saw True Grit. We'll be back in 7 short days, and Bev will give us her second selection in the month of Bev. We'll be talking about one of Werner Herzog's best documentaries, Grizzly Man. But before that podcast comes at you, I'll be back on my own on Friday with a monologue about Buster Keaton's Steamboat Bill Jr. The coming attractions opinion question is for Grizzly Man, though. Werner Herzog has made plenty of fictional films. A lot of them are really good. He's made movies that are based on real people, too, and a lot of those were awesome. Think of Rescue Dawn. I love that movie. But he's probably at his best as a straight-up documentarian. His list of documentaries is very long. What to you is his best documentary? It's probably going to be Grizzly Man, isn't it? But anyway.
Oh, well, you might be surprised. For the answer to that question, check out next week's podcast about Grizzly Man. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive of hundreds of episodes. They're available for free. While you're there, in return for all this great free content, if you could leave us a rating and a review, that is an excellent way to support the podcast. You can also support the podcast by enjoying freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US by going to sparkplug.coffee/HYES, where they will also give you a 20% discount for your first order. You can find us both on Twitter still. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. I am also on Blue Sky as at Bev Ellis Ellis. And Ryan, what's your Blue Sky address?
Ryan-Ellis.
Ryan-Ellis. And it's not at. I keep saying at. Just Bev Ellis Ellis for me. You can also reach us by email, haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. And you can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis.
Before we go, a little tribute to Eddie. Very few people know what I'm talking about. I won't explain why. Love that little boy. He was a good dog. Fill your hands, Bev, and take us out. Fill your hands and take us out.
And